That afternoon, I wasn't meant to be at home. Since my car needed new tires and a brake service, I decided to walk home slowly and take in the fresh air. From the outside, the home was still, but as soon as I entered, I could hear them. Laughter. My wife, Jessica, was in the living room with her sisters, their voices full of enthusiasm. Ordinarily, I wouldn't give it a second thought. Several times a month, they got together for small gatherings where they constantly talked, gossiped, and drank wine. However, there was something strange about today. I listened while standing just out of sight at the top of the basement stairs. I heard it after that. Jessica's sister Beth chuckled and said, "I'm telling you girls, Dave still doesn't know a thing. He thinks the twins are his," Jessica said with a laugh. "But, well, they're not." My blood turned to ice. "No way," laughed Beth. "I've told you, those kids are definitely not his. He never asks questions, never wonders why they don't look like him, not even when they don't have his eyes." My stomach dropped. My fingers dug into the wood as I held on to the railing. "Sarah," another sister said. "And Brad? He has no clue either, right?" "None," chuckled Jessica. "It's all about the details, you know. They never ask the right questions. Like, why does little Maddie look exactly like my ex? But Brad? He still thinks she's his?" The house was filled with their laughing. Now, though, it sounded incorrect now. Something darker, something terrible beneath the surface, replaced the carefree chuckling I once loved. Jessica's keen, humorous voice then broke through. "It's easier to pretend everything's fine. They're also wrapped up in their own lives. They never suspect a thing." My chest constricted. I was having trouble breathing. Was there a joke here? Was one misinterpreting? Was I the subject of her conversation? Then Beth's tone became derisive. "Men really are clueless, huh?" Jessica gave a snort. "Completely." Once more, the room erupted in laughter. That's when I realized this was no joke. There was no miscommunication here. Someone had played me. For many years. How long I stood there is a mystery to me. Minutes? Hours? All I know is that my hands were shaking when I eventually moved. I immediately went to my office, locked the door, and closed it. I then got to work digging. Bank records. Messages were deleted. Purchases made late at night. Everything. I didn't get any sleep that evening. With my laptop screen serving as the sole source of light in the room, I sat in the dark, going over every aspect of my life to find any gaps I had overlooked. And they began to emerge, one by one. Jessica's unexpectedly long nights. She never used the new gym membership. The enigmatic cash withdrawals. The second phone, which she dismissed as an old business phone, that I discovered in her purse last month. I had put my trust in her. With this woman, I had built a life for 11 years. And all the time, behind my back, she was giggling at me. I tightened my jaw. No more. I had no intention of confronting her just yet. That would be too simple, no? I had to be intelligent. I required evidence. For myself and all the men she and her sisters had deceived, I sought a way to annihilate her falsehoods, because I was no longer the only one involved. This was not the first time they had done it, and I would be the one to put an end to it. I performed my part flawlessly throughout the ensuing weeks. I bid Jessica good night with a kiss. When she mentioned baby names, I grinned. I gave her the impression that I was still the idiot she believed me to be. However, behind the scenes, I was constructing my argument. I engaged a private detective. I took samples of our children's DNA. I was able to retrieve deleted phone logs and texts. And the others that I discovered, the worse it became. Jessica wasn't merely unfaithful. She belonged to something greater, a network of dishonesty that extended throughout our whole family. Since I wasn't alone, it was their husbands, all of them. None of them had children of their own. What's the actual kicker? My father-in-law had also suffered harm. He had brought up daughters who weren't his own children. Generations had been playing this sick game. With my hands on the edge of the desk, I gazed at the evidence that was spread out in front of me. They believed that they could not be touched. They believed that nobody would ever know. However, tomorrow? Jessica's parents' big anniversary celebration was tomorrow. 150 visitors, companions, family, and business associates. And that? I was going to burn it all to the ground there. What if they believed they could manipulate me? They didn't know who they were up against. That night, I hardly slept at all. It wasn't because I was in pain. Not because my life had just been torn apart by a betrayal that left me still reeling. No, I had a plan. Because of the pain I felt when I learned Jessica wasn't simply cheating, but was involved in something far more sinister, calculating, and cold. The heartache? It passed away. And where did it go? Fury. Not the kind that causes you to act foolishly and lash out. No, it was silent, managed. The kind of anger that, with great care and purpose, obliterates everything in its path. Because they believed they were untouchable, according to Jessica and her sisters. They believed they could use us as puppets in their perverse little game, rear children that weren't ours, and laugh behind our backs. They believed they would never be discovered, and that was about to change. The centennial celebration took place tomorrow evening. For 50 years, Jessica's parents had been wed. They had a huge celebration with 150 guests, including friends, family, and business associates. A night of recollections, toasts, and speeches. The ideal stage. And me? I was going to perform the best show of my life. Lock down my assets as the first step. Early in the morning, I had a meeting with my attorney. He looked over my notes and remarked, "You need to move fast. If she gets a whiff of what's coming, she could try to drain your accounts, claim spousal support, hell, even custody if she's ruthless enough." I tightened my jaw. She's ruthless. Then we bury her first. My bank accounts were transferred by noon. Everything that Jessica could have gotten her hands on, including my possessions, investments, and money, was safeguarded. She would receive nothing. Step 2. Compile indisputable evidence. I had already gathered samples of DNA. However, I required more. Consequently, I engaged a private investigator. And he didn't even try to sugarcoat it when he returned that evening and gave me a big folder. "Your wife is worse than you think." My gut twisted as I turned the pages. Jessica wasn't merely unfaithful. She approached it strategically. Her pregnancies were timed to ensure that her children weren't mine. In order to ensure that none of her sisters' husbands fathered their own children, she had erased communications that coordinated with them. What's the worst? This was not the first time they had done it. Their father had been harmed by their mother. Their grandfather had also been harmed by their grandma. This was more than a simple affair. It was a custom in the family, a con that is generational. And this family's men? To them, we were merely babysitters and wallets. My nails sank into my hands as I clenched my fists. No, no more. I entered the front door that evening as if nothing had happened. Jessica was humming as she poured a glass of wine for herself in the kitchen. She said to me, "Hey, babe," grinning as if she hadn't spit on our vows. I made an effort to grin. "Hey." As she sipped her wine, she inquired, "Are you looking forward to tomorrow?" "Yeah," I replied, looking her in the eye. "It's going to be a night no one ever forgets." She chuckled. She didn't know. I assembled the last components the following morning. I already had. I secured my assets. I got my legal counsel, acquired indisputable evidence of her deception. Right now, the reveal was about to happen. What's the best part? I wasn't only going to reveal Jessica's identity. I was going to set fire to their whole lineage, because they had all lived their lives on false pretenses. And this evening, I was destroying their idyllic little world. The place was full. The celebration of their 50th anniversary was a lavish affair for Jessica's parents. A ballroom, tablecloths in white, a huge cake with calligraphy in gold, music playing in the background, visitors laughing, and champagne flutes clinking. An ideal evening. I was on the verge of making it into hell. Jessica looked radiant as she moved between tables, introducing herself to family members and pretending to be the ideal mother, wife, or daughter. From the other side of the room, I observed her, allowing her anger to simmer, subdued and lethal. She didn't know. Not one of them did. Not her. Not her sisters. Not the men who still believed they were fathers, their husbands. The perpetrator of this generational scam was not her mother, and most definitely not her father, who was going to come to terms with the fact that he had reared kids who weren't even his after 50 years of marriage. I let them enjoy themselves. I gave them time to toast. I gave in to Jessica's father's nonsense about love, loyalty, and family. Then, with a steady heartbeat, I strode onto the stage when it was my turn to speak. For this reason, there was no vulnerability in this moment. This was the act of execution. I changed the microphone. I cleared my throat, gazed over the throng, and I started. 50 years. I gave the words time to sink in. 50 years is a long time. A lot can happen in 50 years. From the front row, Jessica grinned at me while holding a glass of wine. I returned the smile. I've known this family for 11 years, I added. And in that time, I've learned a lot about love, about loyalty, about trust. I heard whispers. A couple of perplexed looks. Excellent. But I've also learned something else. I looked across to my father-in-law. Sometimes, trust is a fragile thing. Sometimes, when you peel back the layers, you realize it was all a lie. There was silence in the room. Jessica tensed up. Sarah and Beth looked at each other. Her mother's fingers clenched on her glass as she froze. I grinned. Since they were aware, they simply had no idea how much I knew. I dug into my pocket, took a remote clicker out. I continued, "Ladies and gentlemen," in a calm, icy, and ruthless voice. "Let's talk about family." I hit the button. Behind me, the enormous screen sprang to life. The outcome is DNA. Document after document, page after page. They are all demonstrating the truth. In this family, the father did not own a single daughter. Jessica's mother? For decades, she had been playing the same game. The pattern continued after that. Because of Jessica and her sisters, they had treated their husbands in the same way. The crowd sent out gasps. As he read the names, Jessica's father stood slowly, his hands shaking and his face going white. "No," he said in a crackly whisper. Jessica's mother remained silent. For what reason might she say that? There was the evidence. Deception for half a century. Lies for 50 years. I wasn't finished either. Once more, I clicked. More DNA is produced. My children, or rather the children I believe to be mine. Jessica gasped for air. Her wine glass fell out of her hands and shattered on the floor as she shook her head. She began, "Ethan, don't." I paid her no attention. As I said, "These are the DNA results for my children." My voice was even. And as you can see, they are not mine. There was a loud gasp. Jessica's mother closed her eyes, as if she had received a death sentence. Sarah and Beth appeared to be eager to run. Their spouses? They appeared to be about to become ill. For if my children weren't mine, whose were they? I looked out into the crowd. "You might be wondering," I said, "if my kids aren't mine, then who's the father?" Once more, I clicked. On the screen was a new name, Tobias. Jessica's partner in an affair, the father who actually has my kids. Jessica covered her mouth with both hands and let out a broken sob. I looked over at her. "Do you have anything to say, Jessica?" Quiet. Her cheeks were wet with tears. Lost, drowning, cornered like a rat in a burning house. She shook her head. I gave a nod. That's what I thought. Now, the place was in disarray. The truth was being demanded by Jessica's father, who was shouting at her mother. With his face contorted in rage, Beth's husband was snatching up his coat and charging toward the door. Sarah's husband was anxiously looking through his phone, most likely trying to find the closest DNA testing facility. What about Tobias? Like a man who has just realized he walked on a landmine, he stood there with his mouth slightly wide. Excellent. I desired for them to sense it. The startle, the destruction, everything they believed to be true was coming apart. Because they treated us that way, they believed that they could not be touched. They believed they could laugh behind our backs, deceive and lie. They believed we would never learn. And now, all around them, their heritage was on fire. The match was lighted by me too. Jessica was now trembling, crying, and shattered when I turned back to her. I answered, "You can cry all you want," in a chilly tone. "It won't change anything." I dug into my pocket, took a large packet out, divorce documents. I flung them on the table before her, signed them. Her entire body shook as she gazed at them. "Ethan, please, no." I leaned closer. "You ended our marriage the moment you laughed about it with your sisters." Her breath caught, since she was aware. She was aware that I had heard all of it. I pivoted, left the stage by foot, and without turning around, I went out, because I was left with nothing there. I took a deep breath as I left the ballroom and stepped outside into the chilly night air, allowing the cool breeze to soothe the embers still burning in my chest. Behind me, anarchy, crumpled at the table, surrounded by the ruins of her meticulously crafted falsehood. Jessica was still crying. Her dad, his wife, whom he had loved for 50 years, had just been revealed as a phony in front of all their friends and family, and he was yelling at her and demanding answers. With his face contorted in sheer anger, Beth's husband had already rushed out. Sarah's husband was requesting a paternity test, most likely to determine whether the children he had reared were truly his. What about Tobias? He didn't say anything, frozen. A man too dim to understand that he had just ruined his life. But me? I had freedom. I felt it for the first time in years, the chains breaking, the weight being lifted, the smothering hold of a woman who never really loved me finally being released. I also didn't turn around. My phone began to buzz as soon as I got to my car. Jessica. Naturally, I allowed it to ring. She made another call. And once more. And once more. She left a voicemail on the 10th call. I paused. I then pressed play. Her voice was harsh, tremulous, and urgent. "Ethan, please, please pick up. I need to talk to you. I need to explain. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean click. I removed it. Since I didn't require her justifications, she had more than enough time to be honest with me. It took her years to come clean. However, she didn't. Instead, she joked about it. My lawyer had texted me by the time I arrived home. "Tomorrow, we'll complete the divorce paperwork. She won't get any money, therefore, you're in a good position." Excellent. I refused to let Jessica leave with anything. Not my cash. Not at my residence. Not to mention my last name. A knock on my door woke me up the following morning. Before I ever opened it, I knew who it was. Jessica. She had a terrible appearance. Her face was swollen from crying all night. Her hair was in disarray, and her eyes were crimson. "Ethan," she muttered, as she gave herself a brief, pitiful hug. She was nothing like the woman who had once believed she was unbeatable. I folded my arms. "Why are you here?" She took a deep breath. I just need to talk to you." "Talk?" I laughed bitterly. "Jessica, you didn't even give me that much respect before you decided to betray me. So why should I give you anything now?" She winced. She choked out, "I didn't want to hurt you." I gazed at her. "But you did." She gave a head shake. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought you'd never find out. I thought we could just be happy. I said. You thought I was stupid. She looked down at her feet and winced. She was speechless for the first time. No more falsehoods. No more justifications. Nothing but quiet. Excellent. Since I had finished listening. The divorce papers are ready, I said. Her breath caught. You're really doing this? I gave her a blink. Did she really believe that there was another way? Jessica, I added in an eerie tone, you not only cheated, but you carried another man's children and let me raise them. You let me love them. You let me believe they were mine. And you did all of this while laughing behind my back. Her cheeks were wet with tears. I didn't feel sorry for her, though. No more. So yes, I said, I'm really doing this. And you're going to sign those papers. Because if you don't, I lowered my voice and moved closer. I'll take this to court. I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you are. I'll make sure you get nothing. And I'll make sure that, for the rest of your life, everyone will remember you as the woman who destroyed her family for a joke. She trembled. Since she was aware, she understood all I said. She didn't say anything more before leaving. And, later on in the day, they signed the documents. Don't fight, no conflict, no alimony, nothing. All she got was a fresh start and a lifetime of remorse. And me? I left without turning around, due to the fact that I had already squandered enough of my life on an unworthy lady. And now, at last, it was over. Even though every fiber of my being still throbbed with the sting of deceit, the finality of it all was both bitter and liberating, and, as the darkness of the night swallowed me whole, I knew I was finally free. I drove away from that cursed ballroom in the early morning, the cold air slapping my face as I left behind the broken remnants of a family built on lies. With every mile I put between myself and that nightmare, I felt the heavy weight of betrayal gradually lift from my chest. Upon signing the final documents, my hand shaking not out of weakness, but out of a fierce determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I could almost hear the echoes of every insult and every laugh shared behind my back, reverberating in my mind, each one feeding the fire that had brought me to this moment of absolute reckoning. The courtroom verdict had been as brutal as the truth itself, awarding me 90% of every asset, every piece of what we had built over years, now exposed as nothing more than a facade maintained by Jessica and her enablers. I packed up everything that represented her presence, including her shirt, trinkets, and photos, and carefully cleared out the house that had once been my home, leaving nothing but the ghosts of our shared past. When the last box was loaded into my truck, I took one last look at the place where I had believed in love, only to realize that all that was left for me was the promise of a new beginning. Coming home was no longer like returning to a sanctuary, but rather stepping into a void, filled with memories that now burned like coals in the pit of my stomach. Every step I took away from that world felt like a step toward rediscovering who I was, beyond the lies and betrayal, as if shedding an old skin that had grown too heavy to bear. The days following the verdict were a blur of peaceful mornings and long, reflective nights. Although the scars of deceit would forever mark my soul, I found comfort in the simple act of rebuilding, piece by piece, my own truth. In their company, I gradually started to laugh, again not with the resentment of retaliation, but with the hope of healing, knowing that the past could no longer dictate the future I was determined to create. I reconnected with old friends who had supported me even when I doubted myself, their presence a balm for the wounds that still ached with every reminder of Jessica's laughter, her dismissive words, and the cruel game she and her conspirators had played. I had a rare moment of vulnerability one evening as I sat on the worn steps of my new apartment building and watched the sunset fade into the horizon. I felt the phantom pain of love, betrayed and trust broken. But I also had a deep, overwhelming certainty that I was finally moving forward, not as a broken man, but as someone who had learned the bitter lessons of the past and created a future free from lies and manipulation. I started to write down my journey, expressing all of my raw emotions and sharing my story on online forums and subreddits where others had gone through similar experiences. Through these online discussions, I learned that I wasn't alone, that many people had been deceived, and that many people had managed to move past the dark period and rebuild their lives. Every comment and shared experience served as a tiny light that helped me see that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and sincere effort. I concentrated on the small wins in the weeks that followed, like learning to cook for myself, rekindling an old love of hiking in the local trails, and even joining a support group where men like me shared their stories without passing judgment. Their voices echoed the strength and resiliency that had gotten me this far, and every little step was a defiant act of reclaiming my life, an act of declaring that I would no longer be defined by the deceit that had once poisoned every thought. Even though the wounds of betrayal still ached beneath the surface, I found that in her eyes there was a gentle understanding, a silent reassurance that even broken hearts could learn to beat again, stronger and more determined than ever. Then came the day I met Rachel, a kind-hearted soul who had her own struggles with trust and loss. As we spoke over coffee in a quiet little cafe, I felt the stirrings of hope, a subtle yet undeniable warmth that promised a future free from the past. With every day that went by, I felt a little more whole, a little more certain that I was on the path to healing. Rachel never inquired about the specifics of my past or probed into the wounds I carried. Instead, she simply listened when I chose to share. Her presence served as a constant reminder that not all love was tainted, and I learned that forgiveness was about embracing the possibilities of the future rather than absolving myself of the sins of the past. Writing these words now, with the memory of that fateful night still fresh in my mind like a scar, I understand that the road to recovery is not straight, but rather a convoluted one full of disappointments and minor victories. However, every step forward is evidence of the human spirit's tenacity, which is the ability to rise above betrayal, believe in love, and find beauty in the midst of chaos. While I will always remember Jessica's laughter, the laughter that once concealed a lifetime of lies, I have come to realize that sometimes the most painful betrayals result in the most profound changes. Instead, I choose to listen to the sound of my own heartbeat, which is steady, strong, and true. This heartbeat echoes the promise of a new day, a new life, a life reclaimed from the ruins of deceit. And in that newfound freedom, I have finally found my truth, my peace, and the bravery to move on. Because in the end, even the darkest night gives way to the light of a new dawn, and every ending is but the beginning of something beautifully real, something that is entirely your own, dear listeners. If you find yourself caught in a web of lies or fighting the ghosts of betrayal, know this: sometimes the only way out is to let go, to stand tall, and to reclaim your life piece by piece.